I miss my parents terribly. Unfortunately, they were unfairly stripped of their parental rights. They were truly saintly people who taught me to love the Bible and live without sin from a young age. I remember with great love how we would learn prayers in the evenings, and at dinner, we would take turns thanking God for the food. Sometimes, however, my parents did commit a serious sin, and when they did, they would atone for it decisively. Atonement was possible, but it was not easy. Usually my mom or dad would lock themselves in a wooden box for 3 days. In that box, in complete darkness and almost without air, the one who had sinned would sit and pray almost without stopping for 3 days. The only break allowed was for sleep without leaving the box. It was very difficult to stay in there. They had to use the box as a toilet. But who said atonement for sin was easy? During this time, their muscles would cramp, so it took a lot of effort to get them out. My mom and I would pull out my dad, or vice versa. My dad and I would pull out my mom. They looked terrible after this. The smell was awful, and sometimes they even fainted, so we had to carry them to bed. My mom always called this awful smell the scent of sin. This is how sin comes out, my dear, and this is its true smell. But thank God it will soon dissipate. Our house will be cleansed, and we will be with God again, she would say. And so we lived, in full love for each other and, most importantly, for God, trying not to sin. Then I grew up and school began. I remember my first sin. I was too lazy to do my homework. Laziness is a terrible vice that must be fought like the devil. I told my parents about my sin, and they asked me to be more careful. But I thought I was already ready to atone for my first sin in the box. I said that our home is our temple, and there is no place for sin here. It must be atoned for, and I am no exception. At that moment, my mom became worried, and my dad looked at her and nodded with a smile. I understood that he was proud of me. Before putting me in the box, my parents told me to breathe calmly and not give in to fear, as that is also a sin that could destroy me. After thanking my parents for the advice, I began cleansing myself. The first time was very difficult. My legs and knees ached. Sitting in that box, in the cramped space without food and water, was simply unbearable. The next day, the smell was terrible, but I tried to endure it and prayed to God with all my might. I woke up in bed. My parents were proud, but worried because at first they thought God had taken me. They told me that when they pulled me out of the box, I was barely breathing, and my pulse was barely there. God decided not to separate us. Wasn't that a divine miracle? I thought to myself that my sin must have been very great, so I decided never to be lazy again. We lived in complete harmony, but everything changed, and now I have a different life. I so want to go back to that time, but unfortunately, the devil tore us apart. It hurts terribly to remember that awful day. It began quite normally. I was praying for all my past sins, and the third day in the box was the hardest. There was too little oxygen coming through the small cracks. On that day, a miracle happened. I was barely breathing when God showed me my path. That day, I saw God's judgment. In that vision, I was judging sinners with God, deciding who could be admitted to the Garden of Eden and who could not. I was so immersed in it that I understood my life's mission, realized what God wanted from me, and decided to dedicate my life to it. After that, I woke up in the hospital. I immediately started calling for my parents, but they didn't come. A nurse approached, and I asked her where they were. Her answer shocked me. She said I no longer needed to be afraid of my parents, that they were being stripped of their parental rights, and that I would be fine now. At that moment, I had a nervous breakdown and started demanding that they return my parents. They gave me something to calm me down, and I fell asleep. The court stripped them of their parental rights, and the worst part was that they were sent to a mental institution. My psychologist said I had Stockholm Syndrome, but I knew that was nonsense. But continuing to have breakdowns was dangerous. They could send me to a mental institution like my parents and strip me of my future. and I couldn't allow that because it would interfere with God's plan. I could resolve everything, so I had to calm down and pull myself together. In the orphanage, I only had good grades, and for that, I primarily thanked my parents, because from an early age they taught me to read and greatly developed my memory as we learned prayers every day. And God helped me overcome my laziness. I thank Him every day too. When I graduated from the orphanage with honors, I had to choose a college and a future profession where I could fulfill God's plan. I thought for a long time, and my choice fell on the profession of a psychologist. With it, you can determine the purity of a person and judge them. I graduated from university with honors and quickly found a job. When I had saved enough money, I opened my own agency and hired employees. They worked in the office while I started seeing people at my private home. Sitting in my home, in my well-equipped office, I thanked God for everything He had given me. I thought it was time to fulfill God's plan, to cleanse souls that were too dirty. Finally, a successful man came to see me. At first, he seemed like a pleasant person, but within a couple of minutes, he began talking about how he cheated on his wife, how he didn't pay people their wages, and the most important thing was how he took pleasure in it. He was openly admiring himself. I skillfully led him to the truth using various psychological techniques, and the longer we talked, the more I understood that his soul was engulfed in darkness and needed saving. I was immediately glad, because I had prepared everything in advance for saving this soul. When there was no doubt left that his soul needed saving, I put him into a light hypnosis and then made him take a pill, after which he fell asleep. I understood that 3 days wouldn't be enough to save such a soul with such sins, so with great effort, I dragged him by the legs to the backyard of my house. The pit was already dug, and a coffin lay at the bottom. I threw him in there, then placed a flashlight and a Bible beside him. Then I covered the coffin with the lid. I didn't nail it shut, as the earth would press it down anyway, and it was already late. No need to agitate the neighbors. I started filling in the pit when suddenly I heard screams. They were heart-wrenching, and even under the layer of earth, they reached me. I tried not to pay attention to these screams. They were his inner demons coming out, and continued to pile on the earth. I concluded that next time I needed to give more sleeping pills. After such a difficult procedure, I wanted to cleanse my sin too. It was obvious, as I had forgotten to wear gloves, and such a dirty soul could have infected me. After 3 days of cleansing, I washed thoroughly, got some sleep, and then continued to judge different people. But I wasn't ready for the next test. It started as usual. A man came to see me. He introduced himself as William. He was very elegantly dressed, and his manners amazed me. After a few minutes, we sat down, and he began to tell me about his problem. You know, I recently found my true love. I've never loved anyone so much before. Well, that's wonderful, I said. This isn't a typical story. Can I start from the beginning? Yes, of course I'm listening. You know, I really enjoy killing. I thought that I had finally encountered a true demon. He continued. I found an easy victim, went to her house, and was shocked by how unkempt it was. Leaving would have been ungentlemanly. Even to tell you this makes me uncomfortable. Forgive me. What a well-mannered man. Maybe this is the devil himself, I thought. Lord, help me today. I pray to you. You're an excellent listener, said William. It's my profession, I said modestly. Don't get distracted, please continue. To my surprise, for the first time in my life, I became the victim. But when I saw her artwork, I fell in love. I realized that this person was beautiful on the inside. I even stopped noticing her flaws. I fell in love with her, and because of my love, I decided to give her eternal peace. Moreover, I immortalized her. Sorry, what do you mean by immortalized her? I made a beautiful book out of her skin, but I'm still not sure I did the right thing then. You see, I'm scared. Scared that I'll never love again. For a moment I felt terrified, but I tried to hold on. Fear is also a sin. You can't give in to it, This creature could sense my weakness. I needed to stay strong. You look very agitated, William continued. Lord, give me strength, I prayed silently. Your story is very captivating, I said. I walked over to the decanter with compote, poured some for myself and my guest. Thank you, but I don't want to drink, he said. But I made it myself. Please take just a sip. Your opinion is very important to me. I thought you were a true gentleman and wouldn't refuse a lady. Oh, you're right. I'm sorry, I got nervous. Let me try. A few seconds later, William fell. Thank you, Lord, for helping me with this test. I carried him to the backyard and put him in the coffin in the pit. I started covering the coffin with dirt when suddenly I heard a terrifying laugh coming from inside. I hurried and started praying, God, I beg you, turn your gaze upon this devil. Send him back to hell, I pray. When I buried him, I went back into the house and immediately climbed into the box to cleanse myself. I prayed until I fell asleep. In the morning, I heard footsteps in my house. At that moment, fear began to take hold of me. I tried to pray as fast as I had buried that devil. Then someone approached my box and began hammering nails into it. I prayed non-stop, trying to ignore the devil's tricks. After about 5 minutes, the sound stopped. The front door slammed shut, and I wanted to try to open the lid. It was nailed shut. I continued praying. On the third day, gathering my last bit of strength, I managed to break the wall of the box with my foot and escape. On the box lay a note. I began to read. Thank you. You're an excellent psychologist. When I woke up in the coffin, I felt amused and joyful. Thinking about you, I realized that there are still so many wonderful people out there, and I'll definitely be able to find my soulmate. Your approach is brilliant. You're a true professional. I sincerely shake your hand, colleague. Being in the coffin made me appreciate my life even more, but getting out was very difficult. Special thanks for the flashlight. Without it, I wouldn't have had a chance to see daylight again. But you didn't want me to see it again, so here's a little something for you as well. But I know you'll definitely get out of there. And a word of advice for the future. Inspect such a fun procedure carefully. Goodbye, and once again, thank you so much for bringing back my zest for life. Best regards, your patient, William.